Sorry for not being enough today, too. The words come out automatically from Naomi's lips as she looks at herself in the bathroom mirror of her suite. 32 years old, hair impeccably styled for another day as a marketing executive at Global Tech, one of the country's largest multinational companies. But what she sees reflected doesn't match the position she holds, a woman who seems to ask permission to exist. It's 6:30 in the morning, and the routine of self-deprecation has already begun. Sorry for these dark circles, she whispers, applying concealer with mechanical movements. Sorry for this unruly hair. Each makeup product is an attempt to fix something she considers wrong with herself. In the executive elevator of the corporate building, Naomi presses the button for the 23rd floor and immediately turns to the man in a suit beside her. "Oh, sorry. Which floor are you going to?" He hadn't even shown any intention of pressing another button, but she was already anticipating, as if her presence there was an inconvenience that needed to be justified. "Same floor," he replies dryly, without even looking at her. During the morning meeting with the team, Naomi presents the numbers from the last quarter, exceptional results that she herself achieved through an innovative digital marketing strategy. But her words come out preceded by the usual. "Sorry to interrupt, but I believe we had some interesting results." As if asking for her own team's attention was an invasion. "Sorry, but maybe it would be interesting to consider this approach," she continues, minimizing an idea that would revolutionize the next campaign. Her colleagues take notes. Some nod with approval, but Naomi can't see the gleam of recognition in their eyes. She can only hear her own voice apologizing for having a good idea. Naomi's feminine history is marked by generations of women who learned to make themselves small to be accepted. Her mother, Donna Carmen, always said, "Women who stand out too much end up alone, daughter. Learn to be sweet, to not bother anyone." These words echoed throughout her upbringing, shaping a fragmented feminine self-esteem that not even MBA degrees could repair. In the predominantly male corporate environment of Global Tech, Naomi learned that being assertive meant being labeled as difficult. So she developed armor of excessive courtesy, apologizing before each opinion, minimizing each achievement as luck or teamwork, when in reality, they were the result of her individual competence. During lunch, alone at her executive desk, Naomi reflects on the last 10 years of her career. How many times did she apologize for negotiating her salary? How many times did she minimize her own ideas to not seem arrogant? How many times did she accept lesser credit for projects she had led entirely? The true reflection in the mirror of the executive kitchen shows a competent woman, graduated from one of the country's best universities with an international MBA, fluent in 3 languages, responsible for campaigns that moved millions. But what Naomi sees is an imposter who at any moment will be discovered and exposed. "Sorry for being late," she says upon entering the meeting room at exactly 2 p.m. She wasn't late. "Sorry for the delay," she tells the waiter who had just finished, taking her order in the elevator. "Sorry to bother you," she whispers when answering the phone in her own office. Each sorry is a small death of her natural authority. Each unnecessary request for permission diminishes her executive presence a little more. The real beauty of her strategic intelligence, of her business vision, of her leadership capacity, remains hidden behind a curtain of polite self-sabotage. At the end of the day, returning to the same mirror from the morning, Naomi removes her makeup and whispers, once more, "Sorry for another day being less than I should be." She has no idea that tomorrow, all of this is going to start changing. The tomorrow that would change everything came sooner than Naomi had expected. The next morning, she woke up to the same routine as always, but there was something different on the schedule. Quarterly results presentation to the board of directors. Her digital marketing strategy had been a resounding success. 30% increase in sales, record engagement on social media, 3 industry awards. Numbers that any executive would present with pride. But Naomi wasn't in the presentation room. Sitting At her desk, she watched through the glass wall of the main meeting room. There was Carlos Mendonça, her director, gesturing animatedly in front of the board of directors, pointing to charts she had created, explaining strategies she had developed during months of hard work. Rafael's brilliant idea was to implement the integrated omni-channel approach. Carlos's voice came muffled through the glass. He managed to anticipate market trends and develop a campaign that spoke directly to our target audience. Rafael. The same Rafael who had joined the company 6 months ago, fresh out of college, who spent more time adjusting his tie than analyzing performance metrics. The same Rafael who always asked Naomi how to do the most basic analyses. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she held her coffee mug. She remembered perfectly the last team meeting, when she had presented the complete strategy. "Sorry, but I believe this approach could work," she had said, as always minimizing her own genius. Naomi had some interesting contributions too. Carlos continued in the presentation, as if she were an assistant who had helped with minor details. But it was really Rafael's strategic vision that made the difference. The real beauty of years of study, of sleepless nights analyzing data, of sharp intuition about consumer behavior, was being credited to someone who didn't even understand basic metrics. Naomi got up from her desk and walked to the executive bathroom, her legs shaky as if she were walking toward her own professional funeral. In front of the mirror, she saw what she always saw, a competent woman disguised as an imposter. But this time, something different happened. For the first time, she actually saw the woman in the reflection. MBA from Columbia University. 10 years of experience in strategic marketing, 3 consecutive promotions, responsible for Global Tech's biggest successes in the last 5 years, fluent in English, Spanish, and German, expert in consumer behavior analysis. "Who are you?" she whispered to her reflection. The woman in the mirror didn't answer, but her eyes began to shine with a clarity that hadn't existed for a long time. Naomi realized in that crystalline moment that she wasn't just a victim of the situation. She had been an accomplice. Every "sorry, but" had given permission for her competence to be questioned. Every minimization of her achievements had taught others not to take her seriously. Every unnecessary request for permission had given away space that was legitimately hers. The executive bathroom mirror, with its impeccable LED lighting, reflected not just her image, but a painful truth. She had spent years teaching the people around her not to respect her. "The beauty I'm looking for isn't in this mirror," she murmured, lightly touching the cold glass. "It's in my competence, in my intelligence, in my ability to see what others can't see." But then, like a cold wave, came the anger. Not just against Carlos or Rafael, but against herself. Against years of conditioning that made her believe that occupying her own professional space was arrogance. Against a feminine history that taught generations of competent women to become invisible to be accepted. Her feminine self-esteem, built on unstable foundations of external approval, was crumbling. And maybe that was necessary. Maybe it needed to crumble completely so that something more solid could be built in its place. When Naomi left the bathroom, the presentation had ended. Carlos was walking toward her with a satisfied smile, clearly proud of his performance in front of the board of directors. "Naomi, the presentation was a success. The board was impressed with the results." She looked at him steadily, feeling something different bubbling in her chest. It was no longer the automatic impulse to apologize or to passively agree. "Carlos, I need to talk to you." The voice that came from her throat had a tone she didn't recognize. Firm, clear, without apologies. "Of course, Naomi. What's it about?" Carlos responded, still radiant from the success of the presentation that wasn't his. Naomi led him to her office, closing the door behind her. For the first time in 10 years of her career, she didn't offer coffee, didn't worry about making Carlos comfortable, didn't start with apologies or unnecessary preambles. "The strategy presented today was developed entirely by me," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. I have all the emails, all the spreadsheets, all the analyses that prove it. Carlos blinked a few times, clearly surprised by the direction of the conversation. This wasn't how Naomi usually talked. Where were the sorry to bother you and maybe I'm wrong, but... Naomi, well, of course you contributed significantly to the project, he stammered, adjusting his tie. But you know how it is. Raphael has more experience in executive presentations. He has a more, how can I put it, assertive profile for the board of directors. The word assertive echoed in the room like a gunshot. Naomi felt something breaking inside her chest. It wasn't pain, it was liberation. As if a rope that had held her for years had finally snapped. Assertive, she repeated slowly. You mean that a 24-year-old man with 6 months at the company is more assertive than an executive with an international MBA and 10 years of proven experience? That's not it, Naomi. You're twisting my words. Carlos began to show signs of irritation. The important thing is that the project was a success. Why can't you just be happy about that? There it was, the phrase she had heard 1,000 variations of throughout her career. Why can't you just accept it? Why do you have to complicate things? Why can't you be more collaborative? Because, Carlos. Naomi stood up, placing her hands on the desk. For the first time in my career, I'm not going to apologize for demanding the recognition I deserve. Carlos frowned. Naomi, sorry, but you're being too sensitive. Maybe it would be better if we talked when you're calmer. Too sensitive. Those 2 words were the trigger. Not just for the anger growing in her chest, but for a crystal clear clarity about her entire professional trajectory. 10 years hearing that she was too sensitive when she questioned unfair decisions. 10 years being called complicated when she didn't accept crumbs of recognition. 10 years learning that her competence needed to come accompanied by docility to be palatable in the male corporate environment. Sensitive, Naomi repeated, her voice now with a tone she had never used before. I'm not sensitive, Carlos. I'm competent, and competence doesn't need to apologize. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out an organized folder with documents. Here's all the evidence that the strategy is mine. Development timeline, emails with timestamps, presentation, drafts with my digital signature, market analyses that I produced. Everything. Carlos looked at the folder as if it were a bomb about to explode. I'm going to schedule a meeting with the board of directors, Naomi continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. I'm going to present these documents and clarify the real authorship of the project. And I'm not going to apologize for doing it. Naomi, you're overreacting. This could hurt your career at the company. You know how the corporate environment is. Sometimes it's better not to make waves. For the first time in 10 years of her career, Naomi smiled. Not a polite or conciliatory smile, but the smile of someone who had finally seen her own power. Carlos, for years I believed that my competence was a favor I was doing for the company. That my presence here was a concession, something I should be grateful for, and therefore should accept any treatment. She picked up the folder and walked toward the door. But today I understood something fundamental. I'm not here as a favor. I'm here on merit. And merit doesn't need to be humble. Carlos remained silent, visibly uncomfortable with this new version of Naomi. I'm going to send an email to the board of directors today requesting a meeting to clarify the authorship of the project. You can be present or not, but this is going to happen. When Naomi opened the office door, she didn't apologize for ending the conversation abruptly. She didn't ask permission to leave her own office. She didn't minimize her intentions with maybe, or if it's not inconvenient. For the first time in her executive career, she acted like the strong woman she had always been, but had hidden behind layers of unnecessary courtesy. Walking through the corridors of global tech toward her computer, Naomi felt something different in her steps. It wasn't arrogance, it was authority. The natural authority of someone who had finally stopped apologizing for her own competence. She had chosen the break, and for the first time in years, it seemed like the sanest decision she had ever made. The email to the board of directors was sent at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would change the course of Naomi's career. There were no apologies in the text, no if possible or when convenient, just facts, proposed timeline, and professional signature. 3 days later, while waiting for the board's response, Naomi made a decision she never imagined she would make. She hired an executive coach specialized in female leadership. Imposter syndrome were the first words that Helena Carvalho, her new coach, uttered during the initial session. Have you heard of it? Naomi shook her head no, although something inside her immediately recognized the term. It's when competent professionals, especially women, feel they don't deserve their achievements, that they're fraudulent, that at any moment they'll be discovered as incompetent, Helena explained, her eyes gentle but direct. Sound familiar? The following sessions were like peeling an emotional onion. Each layer removed revealed years of conditioning that Naomi didn't even realize she carried. Let's do an exercise, Helena proposed during the third session. I want you to tell me about your last 5 professional successes. But with one rule, no minimizing, no attributing to luck or teamwork. Just the facts. Naomi hesitated. Talking about her achievements without apologizing seemed almost transgressive. The launch campaign for Product X500 that I developed increased sales by 45% in the first quarter, she began, her voice trembling slightly. Continue. No but, or however. My market analysis for the teen segment anticipated the sustainable consumption trend by 8 months, allowing the company to position itself before competitors. With each achievement reported without apologies, Naomi felt something expanding in her chest. It wasn't arrogance. It was recognition of her own competence. It was through Helena that Naomi discovered the existence of the female networking group, Women in Motion, a group of female executives who met monthly to discuss challenges of female leadership in the corporate environment. At the first meeting, Naomi met Patricia Silveira, CEO of a tech startup, and Fernanda Costa, financial director of an international bank. I used to start all my financial analyses with, I might be wrong, but, Fernanda told the group, provoking, knowing laughter among those present. It took me years to realize that none of my male colleagues did this. They presented data with conviction, even when they were factually incorrect. Patricia nodded vigorously. For years, I apologized for making assertive strategic decisions in my own company, as if leading were a usurpation of power, not a responsibility. Naomi saw herself in these strong women who had gone through similar journeys. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in her experience. What changed for you? Naomi asked, genuinely curious. I stopped asking permission to occupy spaces that were already mine by right, Patricia replied. CEO is my title, not a favor someone did, for me. In the following sessions with Helena, Naomi learned practical executive communication techniques. Replace sorry, but I believe that with my analysis indicates. Change. Maybe it would be interesting to consider to I recommend we implement. Stop ending statements with question inflection, as if asking for approval. Now let's work on physical presence, Helena said during one session. Where do you sit in meetings? Naomi reflected. Always on the sides, never at the head of the table. Always with slightly hunched posture, occupying the minimum space possible. This week, I want you to arrive 5 minutes early to any meeting and consciously choose where to sit. Prefer central places, with a view of all participants. Keep your shoulders straight, arms on the table, posture that shows you belong in that space. The first time Naomi implemented the technique was during the weekly team meeting. She arrived early, chose a central chair, and when Carlos entered the room, she didn't move to make space as she used to do. My recommendation for the next quarter, she began when it was her turn to speak, is to expand our digital marketing strategy to include micro-regional influencers. There was no "sorry to interrupt," or "maybe it would be interesting." Just clear presentation of a well-founded strategy. Carlos blinked in surprise but noted down the suggestion. During the following weeks, Naomi practiced occupying her executive space without asking permission. She replied to emails with objectivity, without apologetic preambles. She presented ideas with conviction, supported by solid data. She made decisions within her scope without unnecessarily consulting superiors. The true reflection began to emerge not just in the bathroom mirror, but in every professional interaction. Naomi was rediscovering the competent executive she had always been, but who had been masked by years of social conditioning. Her professional self-love was no longer dependent on external approval. It was sustained by internal recognition of her own competence, by concrete data of her achievements, by evidence of her value as a leader. 3 weeks after sending the email to the board of directors, the response arrived. Meeting scheduled. For the following Friday at 10 a.m., Carlos's presence requested. For the first time in years, Naomi smiled when reading an email related to a potentially confrontational situation. Not because she was certain of the outcome, but because she finally knew she deserved to be in that room, defending her work, without apologizing for her competence. The woman who would enter that meeting would be very different from the one who had spent 10 years apologizing for existing professionally. The meeting room on the 22nd floor had never seemed so intimidating. Naomi adjusted her shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked to her chair without asking anyone's permission. 3 months of executive coaching had planted a seed of courage that would bloom for the first time today. "Let's get straight to the point," said Ricardo, the CFO, leafing through the reports with the expression of someone who had already decided the numbers didn't impress him. "These results... Well, Naomi, are you sure there wasn't some calculation error?" Naomi's blood boiled. It was the perfect cue for the old pattern. "Oh, sorry, let me review it again, maybe I got confused." But something different happened. A firm voice, which she recognized as her own, responded. "The data speaks for itself. My strategy generated the best results in the last 3 years." Silence. 4 men in suits stared at her as if she had spoken in Mandarin. Ricardo blinked. Twice, clearly destabilized by the absence of submission in her response. "Well, but you understand that numbers can be interpreted in various ways," he insisted, trying to regain control of the situation. "Of course I understand," Naomi replied, opening her laptop and projecting the slide on the screen. "That's why I brought the comparison with the last 5 years. 30% growth in revenue, 15% reduction in cost per acquisition, and 25% increase in customer retention. These aren't numbers that need interpretation, they're facts." She realized she was taking up space, not just physical space. Her arms weren't glued to her body like before, but emotional space. Her voice filled the room without apologizing for existing. "Interesting," said Carlos, her director, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But don't you think it was a bit too bold to bet so much on digital without consulting the senior team?" Naomi felt the trap. It was exactly the type of question that used to make her implode in apologies. "Oh, you're right. Sorry, I should have thought better. It was hasty of me." Instead, she replied, "Bold is the right word. Leaders make bold decisions based on solid data. Market research clearly indicated the migration of consumption to digital platforms. I executed the strategy at the right time." The real beauty of her leadership was emerging. It wasn't about pleasing or being liked. It was about being competent and owning her victories without minimizing them. "Naomi." Ricardo's voice now carried poorly disguised irritation. "Don't you think you're being a bit difficult? After all, teamwork is about collaboration, isn't it?" She recognized the code. Difficult was the word they used for strong. Women who didn't bow to expectations of docility. For years, Naomi had molded her leadership to be palatable, digestible, harmless. "Collaboration is fundamental," she agreed. "That's why my team grew 40% in productivity. When you lead with clarity and authority, people respond better. There's nothing difficult about being competent." The true reflection she had seen in the mirror that morning was materializing in the meeting room. An executive who didn't apologize for her strategic intelligence, who didn't diminish herself to fit others' expectations. "Well," Ricardo closed the folder with more force than necessary, "I think we have a lot to discuss internally about this approach." "Of course," Naomi replied, saving her presentation. "When you want to discuss the next steps to replicate these results in other divisions, my schedule is open." She left the room without hurry, without apologizing for taking up anyone's time, without minimizing her achievements. For the first time in her corporate career, Naomi had said no without apologies. No to condescending treatment, no to the invisibilization of her competence, no to the need to be liked by men who never had to choose between being respected or being pleasant. In the elevator, her professional self-love pulsed like a newly awakened heart. The emotional narrative that had always governed her, that female executives need to ask permission to exist, was being rewritten in real time. It was just the beginning. 8 months later, Naomi was once again standing in front of the executive bathroom mirror. But something had fundamentally changed. It wasn't her face. The same expression lines, the same brown eyes, the same subtle smile. The difference was in the woman who stared back at her. "Good morning, Director," she whispered to the reflection, and for the first time, the word didn't sound like an imposture. The promotion had come 6 weeks after that memorable meeting with the board, not as a favor or a concession, but as a natural consequence of leadership that didn't apologize for being excellent. Naomi now managed a team of 15 people and had discovered that true authority was quite different from what she had imagined. "Naomi?" Camilla's voice, her new assistant, echoed at the bathroom door. "The Stay Beautiful leadership meeting will start in 5 minutes. Naomi smiled. The mentorship program she had created for the company's female executives was already in its 3rd class. It wasn't about makeup or appearance. It was about the real beauty of leading authentically, without masks of submission. In the meeting room, 8 women were waiting for her. Some still carried the same look that Naomi recognized in herself months ago, competent, but convinced they needed to ask for permission to exist. "Before we begin," said Mariana, a 28-year-old financial analyst, "I wanted to apologize for questioning Peterson's budget yesterday. I know it seemed kind of aggressive on my part." "Stop," Naomi interrupted gently. "First rule, we don't apologize for doing our job well. Questioning budgets is your function. Being precise with numbers is your competence, not your aggressiveness." She saw Mariana's face slowly transform, as if a light was turning on inside. It was the same moment that Naomi had lived months ago, when her coach had asked, "Why do you apologize for being good at what you do?" "Do you know what the moment was that changed everything for me?" Naomi asked, walking to the window that overlooked the city. "When I stopped treating my competence as a happy accident and started treating it as an earned right." She told them about the meeting with Ricardo, about the first no without apologies, about how she had discovered that strong women in the corporate environment don't need to be palatable. They need to be respected. "My feminine story always taught me that women who stand out too much end up alone," she continued. "My mother said that, my first boss said that, I myself said that. But I discovered that women who diminish themselves also end up alone. They end up alone with themselves." Paula, the HR manager, timidly raised her hand. "But how do we deal with those comments when they call us difficult or complicated?" "Simple," Naomi replied with a smile she hadn't known before. "You embrace it. I'd rather be a difficult leader who generates results than a pleasant executive who is invisible." The true reflection she had discovered in those months wasn't just in the bathroom mirror. It was in the way she entered meeting rooms, in the confidence with which she presented projects, in the naturalness with which she made strategic decisions. "Do you know what's most interesting?" Naomi asked, returning to the table. "When I stopped apologizing for being competent, people started respecting me more, not less, more. True authority doesn't intimidate people who are secure in themselves." She observed the women around her, some still hesitant, others already with the gleam of understanding in their eyes. That was exactly how her own transformation had begun, with the realization that female empowerment wasn't about being more aggressive, but about being more authentic. "I want you to do an exercise with me," she said, picking up a marker. "Let's list how many times we apologize for things that don't need apologies, starting with me. Last week, I apologized to the supplier for bothering him with a deadline request. Deadline requests are management, not bothering." The list grew quickly. Apologies for asking intelligent questions, for having innovative ideas, for taking up physical space in elevators, for negotiating fair salaries. Each item was a small murder of their own authority. "Now let's rewrite," Naomi said. "Instead of sorry to bother, let's practice, I need this information. Instead of sorry but I believe, let's use my analysis indicates." When the meeting ended, Naomi stayed alone in the room for a few minutes. Through the window, she watched the city moving in the late afternoon. She thought about all the women down there who still apologized for existing, for being intelligent, for holding leadership positions. Her emotional narrative had completely changed. It was no longer the story of a woman who needed to ask permission to be extraordinary. It was the story of a leader who had learned that self-love in the corporate environment wasn't vanity. It was justice. That night, in front of her home mirror, Naomi saw a woman who had stopped apologizing for existing, not because she had become perfect, but because she had learned that her existence, her competence, her leadership weren't accidents that needed justification. They were rights earned through hard work. And this discovery, she knew, was just the beginning of a lifetime without unnecessary apologies. If you also recognized yourself in this feminine story, remember, your competence isn't an accident. It's an earned right. Stop apologizing for being extraordinary. The world needs more women who occupy their spaces without asking for permission. Because the most revolutionary beauty a woman can have is the courage to exist fully. If this story touched your heart, it's because you too have already recognized yourself apologizing for being extraordinary. Enough with diminishing yourself. Enough with asking permission to shine. Leave your like, share with your friend, and subscribe to the channel. Remember to stop apologizing for being incredible.